and one of the most important parts of this story is to remember that we say the South and what power it owned. It's a different South. It's a South where the elite after the Civil War may, in fact, include large numbers of the same individuals who were part of the elite before the war, but they're not a slave-owning class anymore. And so one can say without any, I think, contradiction that the slave-owning class, which had controlled political life in the United States at the national level for most of that pre-war era, has no political power after the Civil War because it doesn't even exist anymore. So that's the easiest way to make a distinction. But even at another level, the distinction between the amount of political power that the Southern elite exercises nationally before the war and, say, between Lincoln's election and Woodrow Wilson's election, so it's a little earlier than the time that you and I remember, is very, very sharp. So we were saying earlier that in the pre-war period, South was usually enjoying a president from its own ranks in the White House. Same was true of the Supreme Court. The same was true of Speaker of the House. That was rarely true between Lincoln's election and Wilson's. The proportions are at least reversed. You don't have, I think there's no Southerner in the White House after Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson's not elected to the presidency until Woodrow Wilson. The number of justices from the South is radically reduced. The same is true of the speakers of the House of Representatives. Moreover, it's good to remember that while the South in that era still exercises some power at the national level, it does so through the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is a minority party in that era for most of the time. So between Lincoln and Wilson, once again, there's only one Democrat elected to the presidency, and that's Grover Cleveland, who is a Northerner.
Right.
So our memories from the 1960s and the 1970s can give us a false impression of what the post-war decades were like.
Right, right. That's really interesting. Wasn't Cleveland the guy of whom they had a ditty, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa, gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha"?
I think I remember a political cartoon that looked like that.
Because he had an illegitimate child.
Well, political cartoons were pretty rough in those days.
Yeah, I guess. Here's something, Bruce. Number one, I wish they taught what you have just said about the flip in eras from, up to 1860, then up to 1912. Or, well, actually 1920 was the end of Wilson's tenure. And then again to the Republicans, then to Roosevelt. I wish they would teach that more often, because most of us have had no concept of how, particularly in the late 19th century, the last 30 years, this flip occurred.
Excuse me for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
One of my students always are amazed to learn that at its inception, the Republican Party was the radical political party, the left-wing political party in the United States, and the Democrats was the Southern-based conservative political party.
Right.
And they always looked at me aghast and say, "What happened between then and now?"
Let me ask that question.
I put my foot in it right there.
No, it's clearly quite true. I guess one would say that what happened was that the Republicans became the allies of big business, and many of them were big businessmen, and it changed the whole attitude of the party from, 1880 on?
Well, I think that's really key. Businessmen become much more conservative over the course of the 19th and into the 20th century. In the 1860s, they feel themselves, or at least many, feel themselves to be and are the cutting edge of progress, including personal liberation. And they're contrasting themselves still with feudalism and slavery. Once those wars are won, and they don't feel challenged from the right, they start to feel menaced elsewhere, and they start to see menace in the ranks of their legally free employees, start to resent demands of the former slaves, for a little bit more than simply political freedom from slavery. And you see a march to the right throughout the rest of the 19th century. Meanwhile, over that subsequent century, the Democratic Party, or at least the Northern Democratic Party, changes its base of support. So the Democratic Party, by the end of Truman's era, while it includes obviously a politically powerful core of Southern Democrats, now depends for electoral support on Northern wage earners and immigrants and black people. And that has a lot to do with its change of political stance.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, a leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.